Summerlin, the fancy part of town on the edge of Red Rock. This neighborhood has the reputation of being a little snobby. But is that a fair rap? Today on CityCast Las Vegas, I'm here with historian Jeff Schumacher, VP of Exhibits and Programs at the Mob Museum, and our resident Summerlin local executive producer Sonia Cho Swanson. We're going to find out how this far-flung neighborhood got there in the first place and get some recs on where to eat and play when you want to give Summerlin a chance. It's Tuesday, June 4th. I'm Sarah Lohman, and here's what Las Vegas is talking about. Sonia and Jeff, so what do you feel is Summerlin's reputation in Las Vegas? Is there a stereotype of that neighborhood?
Yeah, it's the bougie part of town, right? It's the place that people love to hate on. Especially the thing I hear a lot is Summerlin moms as a stereotype. It's the moms with like the really fancy strollers and like the expensive purses, giving their kids like the best of every expensive thing. So I don't know. What do you think, Jeff? What have you heard about Summerlin's reputation?
Well, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think that it everything is a little more expensive in Summerlin, right? Uh-huh. And everything's just there's a sense that if you live there that you're special and deserved or not. But there's a lot of reasons to defend that too. I mean, Summerlin has a lot going for it.
Yeah.
I have a lot of friends that live in Summerlin. So honestly, the only thing I hold against Summerlin is being so far from me personally. It is as far across town as I can go from Townsite Henderson. And I'm always a little freaked out about gated communities. Like I'm used to living in really open urban environments. And that was really new for me when I moved here a couple years ago. So I'm interested in getting into that. And Jeff, I know from reading your book, Sin, Sun, and Suburbia, which is, I really love because it's a history of a lot of different neighborhoods, not just the Strip, that Summerlin, it's got a really interesting origin. Can you tell me more about how it was established?
Sure. So, Summerlin was never envisioned to be what it is today. Howard Hughes, the reclusive billionaire, he acquired the land where Summerlin is currently located back in 1952. And his idea was he was going to use this land to move Hughes aircraft to the desert. Hughes Aircraft was based in Southern California. They were involved in World War II, building aircraft, building satellites, all the things that he was involved in. And he had the idea of moving that whole operation to Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. He bought this land. He got a great discount on the property. It was a land exchange that he did with land that he had acquired in northern Nevada. And so he wanted to move there. He never did move there. He never did move Hughes aircraft there, but he kept the land. And so after Hughes died, then his heirs took over all of his properties. He had land and he had casinos and he had golf courses and he had things all over the United States. And they started selling off things. They sold off the casinos. They sold off the golf courses. They sold off everything with the exception of this big piece of land out west of Las Vegas, 25,000 acres, which they held on to and said, you know what, we think we can do something with this that will make us far more money than we would ever make selling all of this other stuff. And that's exactly what they did.
So do you have a sense of how then Summerlin developed as this system of gated communities?
Well, the development of Summerlin it started in the early 80s, really got going in the late 80s and then into the 90s, of course. And it was inspired by what was happening in California, Southern California. Mm-hmm. Irvine, California was a model and some other places where gated communities were becoming a popular option. Now, not every neighborhood in Summerlin is gated. I think that's important to know.
That's true. You're right.
But a lot of them are, and it became a bit of a trend here in Las Vegas for neighborhoods to be gated. And I think it has to do with the notion of protection, crime, safety, that became so I'm older, right? So I grew up at a time when kids would ride their bikes by themselves, unaccompanied by their parents all over town.
Yeah.
And the parents didn't worry too much, and you kind of
Oh,
just
I grew up
fended.
in the 80s and 90s. I told my mom that I was feral, which I do think is true.
Exactly.
My sort of last question to go along with that is one of the things you mentioned in your book, that there is some criticism of like people from the East Coast like me coming into Vegas and seeing these gated communities. And I admit it was also sort of a shock to me. What is that criticism and what is your pushback to that?
Well, if the criticism that I observed and I wrote about in the book has a lot to do with the perception of the soullessness of these suburbs, right? That somehow all the houses look very similar, if not the same. They're very cookie cutter in its design, and so there's really no personality that can be derived or even allowed on the part of a homeowner. So you can't paint your house purple in Summerlin. You can
Right.
do that, in other parts of town, and that's of course the way that people want it there, because their perception is that if their neighbor paints their house purple, that the value of their home goes down, and that may be true.
That's funny because this morning Sonia asked me why I wouldn't want to buy a condo. That is it, Sonia, because I can't paint my house purple. Maybe not specifically, but that's maybe part of the idea. Sonia,
Sure.
do you feel that like Summerlin has a soulless or isolated quality in the residential structures?
There's a lot of similarity. Like the houses definitely do look a lot more similar to each other. And I think that kind of comes down to like what Jeff was saying about what residents want. And there are some really strict HOA rules in place. Summerlin is governed by two major HOAs, one in the north, Summerlin North, and one in the south, Summerlin South. Summerlin South is kind of seen as a little bit more bougie, a little more wealthy. You'll have like kind of like the Uber gated kind of $2 million houses in Summerlin South. But then here's what's crazy. Within those HOAs, there are like sub HOAs for some of these communities as well. So
Wow.
you're not only paying like, a few hundred to Summerlin, you're also paying a couple extra hundred to these individual HOAs, which maybe pay for like a gate guard or your local community pool. The visual similarity of all these neighborhoods is not far off, but I actually did, when I was reading up on Summerlin a little bit, dig up this fact. Jeff, I'm curious if you read about this, but apparently the first urban roundabout, those traffic roundabouts, was built in Summerlin. The first in the country was built in Summerlin in 1990. And a lot of urban planners love roundabouts because they're apparently safer than, four-way traffic stops. And we are the home of roundabouts apparently in the country.
Summerlin was very progressive on roundabouts. It wasn't the first; it was one of the first communities in America to really embrace them at the volume that you see in Summerlin. And that's very thoughtful, because the initial reaction was very negative to it. People are like, "Oh, it's something different. I
Yeah.
can't imagine it. It's safer," but in fact, it is.
I find most people over the age of 60 hate them. That is a
Yeah.
generalization, but that is my small sample size says so.
I think you're right.
I mean, they're annoying. It's fair, but they are safer.
I'm fine with them. Controversial opinions over here. Summerlin, we are progressive on roundabouts. Think about it, Summerlin. Here's what I'm really curious about. So there is now a dispute going on. Summerlin, that land that Howard Hughes owned was very close to Red Rock, and there was some land exchanges basically to turn that area into a preserve. And that was a big conversation that was being had before Summerlin was developed. And so now here we are many years into the future. Summerlin is very developed, and there's a push to build more houses closer and closer into Red Rock. Jeff, do you have any sense of what's going on there and why?
Well, I think there's a historical point I would make, and then I'll come back to the current day, which is there were a series of land exchanges, basically between the government and the Hughes people, to kind of shape Summerlin and to preserve Red Rock Canyon. And what ended up happening is that the incursion into Red Rock Canyon was reduced. So if that had not happened, in other words, if those exchanges back in the 80s had not occurred, it would be frightening how far Summerlin ventures into the Red Rock Canyon area today. Now, having said that, if you look at it today, it's still surprising to me how far west those homes go when you're driving west on Charleston, and you keep going closer and closer to Red Rock, and they're still building neighborhoods. So it could be worse, could be much worse. But I do think there might be room there for another land exchange, or for another sort of common sense switch out, so that Summerlin doesn't venture too awfully far into really what's our most prized public
Yeah.
area in the valley. The fact that they did do these exchanges back in the 80s, I think was incredibly thoughtful on their part, because they could have ignored that and had houses encroaching even further into the canyon. That said, I still feel like it would be nice if there at some point they were able to stop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that kind of feeds into the resentment that the greater Las Vegas area has of Summerlin, because these are public lands for public use. And so if Summerlin kind of starts to eat away, it's like, oh, these Richie Riches get access, to
Or
these.
purchasing the view, essentially,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
taking
essentially.
it from everybody.
Yeah, right, right, right. And kind of like hoarding these like common resources just for
Yeah.
themselves.
Money shouldn't be able to buy you everything. This week, CityCast Las Vegas welcomes a new local sponsor, Global Product Sourcing. They've helped Las Vegas businesses grow for the past 30 years by creating promotional items that connect brands to customers. I love promotional swag. I will take it all. Glasses cleaning cloths? Yes, my glasses are dirty. Little packs of Sandy wipes? Yes, they're going right in my glove box for when sticky children get in my car. Drawstring backpacks, I use them as shoe bags in my suitcase. So basically, my branded merch is traveling the world. Global Product Sourcing's catalog contains tens of thousands of items, and they will help you choose what's going to work best for you with your goals and align with your budget. They're local, family-owned, and great to work with. Global Product Sourcing is also supporting our Hey Las Vegas newsletter. Check out their ad in today's edition or go to thegpsinc.com. That's thegpsinc.com, thegpsinc.com. Well, okay, so on that, what is it like? What's Summerlin like today? Sonia, you grew up there, yeah?
I did. Yeah. And honestly, I have to confess that I actually feel a little trepidation outing myself as someone who grew up in Summerlin.
You seem fine.
I am more or less normal. Jeff, you don't know me, but I promise I'm more or less normal. But I actually went to Clark High School as a magnet student, so I would kind of bus in from Summerlin. When my classmates would hear that I lived in Summerlin, it was like, oh, Summerlin.
Yeah.
That was kind of the vibe a little bit there. So I mean, Summerlin today has developed a ton commercially. I remember before, when I was growing up there just wasn't as much shopping or restaurants or eating. And then in the last 20 years, we've seen downtown Summerlin, that huge shopping complex center, really grow up. And I think a lot more eateries and dining and so forth around other parts of Summerlin as well.
Yeah, and some really, I mean, even in that shopping complex, there's that Zombie Drafts and Pizza place, and there's a Makers and Finders up there. So there's also like some really well-known and well-respected like food and drink brands up there too.
Totally.
Jeff, when was the last time you were in Summerlin?
Oh, I was there over the weekend. Downtown Summerlin is kind of a destination for a lot of eating and shopping, right? I was going to say something that I thought, this is off of the shopping side a little bit and the eating side, but my favorite place in Summerlin is the oldest park in Summerlin, which is Pueblo Park. Pueblo Park off of Buffalo and Lake Mead. It follows the ravine there, and it is really a trail as much as it is a park. And this is, to me, what means a lot to me about Summerlin is this dedication to these public spaces. And they're not gated, and anybody can go, and they are fantastic. And for example, in Pueblo Park, I mean, once you get into the deep recesses of Pueblo Park, I mean, you barely can hear traffic.
Yeah.
You do see houses up on the ridges around you, but you definitely feel like you are not in some kind of make-believe park, like Midwestern park, like you would see in most neighborhoods. The thing about Pueblo Park is it's not a grass park. It's not ball fields and that kind of thing. It's the desert. And so I use this phrase in my book. It's more of an homage to the desert rather than a rebuke. Now,
Yes.
rebuke would be what
that.
most parks are, right? Most parks are like, oh, we want this to be like a park that would naturally grow in Madison, Wisconsin, or in the Northeast somewhere. No, they're saying this is the desert. We're embracing it, and we're going to make this a great place to go that is still very deserty.
Yeah.
I love that.
There's another park like that, Jeff, that I love your phrasing. Gosh, not a rebuke to the desert. That's great. A little pocket desert park called Hualapai Park on Hualapai and Alta that I love. And like I just love to take my dog around and do a couple loops. And it's got great views of the whole valley. You'll see barrel cacti and desert birds and sometimes rabbits running across the trail. And it's lovely. Honestly, actually, that's one of the things that Summerlin does really well. But I feel like maybe like the rest of the valley should get some of this too,
Yeah.
because I was looking it up and I think Summerlin has something like almost 300 parks within Summerlin alone, which is kind of wild. I mean, that's like some of the highest concentrations of parks we have in the valley. And I was looking at like parks by county, like within Clark County district. And if you look at, district A, B, C, D, et cetera, they've got like, 15, 20, 7, 5, whatever. And you get to District F, which is where the bulk of Summerlin South lies, and they've got 34 parks. It's like,
Yeah.
and if you even just look at a map, just open up Google Maps, like look where the green spots are.
Yeah. I mean,
Like,
it seems like in a large part because it's a planned community. Would you say that that's accurate, Jeff?
Well, I would say two things about it. Yes, it's definitely a product of the master planning of the community, but I think it's an economic thing too. Keep in mind the heirs to Howard Hughes acquired this land and they owned it outright. They paid nothing for this land, and Hughes paid barely anything for it back in the 1950s. If you're building a neighborhood like my planned community, Providence, which is north of Summerlin, the people who built Providence paid many, many, many millions of dollars for that land. So they're going to want to maximize what they get out of that land once they buy it. And so they're going to have some parks, of course. They'll do it the bare minimum to make people happy. But in Summerlin, they could afford to offer up all of this acreage for parks because they didn't have to recoup their expense.
Wow. I would have never thought of that. All right. So, I just want to do one more round of Rex here. It is an eating, drinking destination. I would like to shout out my favorite restaurant, which is in a strip shopping center. It's called Pierogi Village. I don't know if you even know. Good, Sonia knows what a pierogi is. I took my mom, and we're both from Cleveland, which is a very pierogi-centric community. And it turns out that the owner of Pierogi Village is also from Cleveland. So if you want some authentic Northeastern Ohio-style pierogies, you've got to go. Stuffed cabbage. I love it. And you know what? It's right next to a Savers. So this is basically my dream day. It's all I want.
Amazing.
It's my personal heaven. Sonia, what about you? Where do you like to go when you're in Summerlin?
Okay, so if we're up in that corner of Summerlin North area around Lake Mead, if you hop across the street, across Rampart, there's a German bread bakery.
Oh,
And oh man, if you
Jeff is
like,
nodding too. I've never been. What's it called?
it's literally called German Bread Bakery. It's very easy to remember. Have you been, Jeff, before?
I have been. It's excellent.
Oh, it's so good.
That sort of Summerlin North is kind of my mindset as far as my knowledge of Summerlin. That Savers, for example.
Oh yeah.
But also there's an omelet place right there
Yeah.
near the German bread bakery that's also very good.
And if you just love that hearty German rye, and they have great pastries and apple cakes and things, and I went wild there. It's great. And then if you pop over to the southeast of that intersection, I think you've been there before, Sarah, but there's a Thai place that I like called Nataya's Secret Kitchen.
It's my favorite Thai place
Yes.
Weirdly, I've never been to that one. There is one even further north.
Okay.
In another development, and I cannot remember exactly where, but it doesn't matter. The food is exceptional. The dishes are interesting. My in the area of Rex is if you're going to the Rainbow Burrowing Owl Preserve, which is right by Gilcrease, and go at dusk, you'll see a lot of owls, very leggy, very cute, and then you can go to Nataya's Secret Kitchen for dinner. Another perfect day. It seems like we're talking rather warmly about Summerlin. Does Summerlin deserve the hate that it gets? What do you think, Sonia?
I mean, yes and no, right?
Hmm.
Like anytime you have any kind of wealthy enclave in a city, of course it's going to be diverting resources, right? Of
Hmm.
course you're going to have families who are more able to afford to send their children to private schools and, withdraw those funds and resources from like the public school system, right?
Hmm.
Of course you're going to have, more urban sprawl, which is more expensive infrastructure for the city to like build and maintain. Of course you're going to have people who maybe have like more influence over politicians, I mean, that kind of stuff is in every American city. And I
Hmm.
think in Las Vegas, we see that particularly to be the case in Summerlin. Of course, there are other wealthy enclaves in the valley. I mean, Green Valley is also very expensive. I mean, but Summerlin, because I think of its branded nature, has kind of taken on the mantle for that.
Sure.
But, you know, as long as we're talking about the resources that are publicly available, I would just hope that people would understand that Summerlin isn't closed off and they can go in and access those parks as you suggested, Jeff.
Yeah.
And then I hope that we could also take some lessons for things that work well in Summerlin and apply them to the rest of the city. But I don't know. What do you think, Jeff? Does it deserve the hate?
Well, I think here's what I think. I
Hmm.
think that some of this antagonism towards Summerlin could start in high school.
Hmm.
Right?
Like
So
you had, Sonia.
if you live in other parts of the valley, and the schools that are in Summerlin are Bishop Gorman, right?
Yep.
Faith Lutheran, Meadows School, and these are private schools, and then you have Palo Verde. And if you're coming from other schools in the valley and you have an athletic competition or a band competition or whatever, there's that snooty factor comes into
Sure.
play for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I know my daughters felt that way, when they would encounter these Summerlin schools. And so I think it might start there. Maybe it's not fair, but there's, you mentioned at the outset the Summerlin moms. There's something to that,
Yeah.
and it has to do partly with you can see it when they all line up in front of Bishop Gorman High School to pick up their kids after school every day, where other kids get to walk home or take a bus. Mom's waiting in her very nice SUV to pick you up at Bishop Gorman. So it's definitely there's that kind of class division that comes into play, I think.
Yeah.
So just real quick, Sonia, why should Las Vegans give Summerlin a chance?
I think that Summerlin isn't a monolith. Something we learned when we talked to Ray Lathrop, who runs a food pantry in Summerlin, is that there actually are people who are struggling in Summerlin, and there is some hidden poverty there. And there are multi-generational families. There are people who are struggling to get by. There are people who are, maybe house poor. Summerlin is in some ways a stand-in for our city's resentment over income disparities overall, but maybe consider that not everyone from Summerlin has the same story.
Jeff, last question. Why should Las Vegans give Summerlin a chance?
Well, I think Las Vegans should give Summerlin a chance because, first of all, it's huge.
Yeah.
To ignore it is to miss out on opportunities. The public parks system, the trail systems are amazing out there. I'm a person who likes to explore the valley. I'm not stuck in one part of the valley, and this has to do with being a journalist for 30 years probably.
Yeah.
But I just sometimes when I'm by myself, I just drive and I go and look at things. And I think there's a lot more diversity in Summerlin than meets the eye, and there's a lot of interesting things you can discover if you kind of just look around. And a lot of it's the open spaces like the parks, but also there's a lot of retail, a lot of restaurants that we probably don't even know about that are out there if we go take a look.
Sonia, Jeff, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That's all for today here on CityCast Las Vegas. If you enjoyed this show, why not tell a friend? You can rate the show and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget, subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Take care. But always interesting to me that we say it's Summerlin moms and not Summerlin dads. I think
That's a
sometimes
good
that
point.
we over criticize the choices that women
fair.
make,
Good
right?
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.